call, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam President, you have a quorum.
All right, first item on our agenda is the ESSA school report card update from Austin. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I think I've met everyone at this point, but Principal County State Superintendent of Education at OSSI. I really appreciate you all having me here this evening and giving me a little bit of time on the agenda. I normally join the public meetings of the State Board of Education, but unfortunately I have a scheduling conflict with the one later this month, so wanted to come, especially with so many new members, wanted to come and just spend a little bit of time with you all today at the working session. I will touch a little bit on SN School Report Card, but I actually wanted to also just give a little bit of context and on my perspective on the last few years of our close work together between OSSI and the State Board of Education and how I've approached this work in particular during my time at OSSI. So earlier this week I was really honored, was it earlier this week? Yeah, 2 days ago. Time is confusing. So earlier this week I was really honored to be reappointed by Mayor Bowser to a second 4-year term as State Superintendent of Education. I was originally appointed in March 2015 for a 4-year term, and at the time, so it was a sort of interesting moment to reflect on the last almost 4 years now. When I first came in 2015, one of my very first meetings was with then President Jack Jacobson at the State Board, and it was really important that that was one of my first meetings because unfortunately under my predecessor, the relationship between OSSI and the State Board had frayed. It was not strong at that point in time, and so to me it was very important to signal as a new leader just how much I do value this working relationship and see the importance of our bodies working closely together. When I was Chief of Staff at the Tennessee Department of Education, we worked very closely with the State Board of Education there, and so I knew it was a priority for me coming into this role. And I'm really proud to look back on a lot of the work that we have done together by rebuilding the strength of that partnership and really thinking together about how we could better serve students, families, educators, schools, and LEAs throughout the District of Columbia. We don't always agree, but we've had very open lines of communication, and I think through our dialogue and our productive partnership, we have found ways to improve the ways in which we serve all of our collective constituents. So just a few examples of some of the work that we have done together. In 2015, the board approved a statewide competency-based credit option for local education agencies that gave LEAs the opportunity to create flexibility from seat time requirements and provided meaningful progress for flexibility to better educate students in particular circumstances. In 2016, we created a new state diploma that brought DC in line with Maryland and Virginia in providing our adult learners with a diploma when they earned their GED or NEDP. In 2016 and 2017, together we updated the health and physical education standards for our students. We brought our standards up to date, used national best practice, but also adapted for the DC context, and importantly made sure that those standards reflected a strong consensus among educators, practitioners, and reflected student voice that had importantly been a part of that progress, and reflected our investment collectively in student health, both physical health and mental health. In 2016 and 2017, as you all know, the State Board was instrumental in soliciting and elevating public feedback around ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan for DC, and strengthened our work in several key ways. The State Board of Education certainly pushed OSSI and made sure that we understood the importance of feedback, both on the state plan itself and the STAR framework, as well as on the report card. So just wanted to highlight a few areas where that feedback was particularly meaningful and resulted in really significant changes. When OSSI first proposed a draft state plan for ESSA and released a comprehensive draft plan for what the STAR framework would look like, we had weighted achievement and growth equally for elementary and middle schools. They were each weighted at 40 points, and so collectively they made up 80 points of the overall framework. And what we heard from the board and from many members of our community was that there needed to be a greater emphasis on student growth, more so than achievement, and that the total weight on the two needed to be lowered. And so we made both of those changes in the final plan that came before this board for approval. We lowered the weight on academic performance from 40% to 30% and kept growth at 40%. And so we achieved both of those things, both lowering the total weight and weighting growth more so. We also increased the weight on school environment measures from 15% to 25%. We also committed to developing a plan for high school growth and adding an access to opportunities measure and future accountability systems. We are continuing to work closely with the asset task force to live up to those commitments and look forward to continuing to report out to the full board as well on those commitments. I also want to note that obviously the state board was essential, and the asset task force that was convened by the state board was essential in ensuring that public feedback and particularly input from families was at the core of the new DC school report card. And so again, when we released a draft plan on report card content, the state board pushed us, said there was great work that had gone into that draft plan, but pushed us to look even more at metrics around school health, physical activity, and parent engagement, as well as for more teacher data, and we made changes to reflect that input and feedback as well. So our work on the report card will continue, obviously, as we look at the use of the first year's release and plan ahead for future years, and we look forward to continuing to work with you all as partners. Finally, I just wanted to say that I know that we all share a commitment to wanting to see our schools and our system improve so that we can better serve all students, and I want to just keep that shared collective commitment at the core of our work together. So even if we disagree on particular matters or have questions, and as we continue to work through those issues, I know that in the next 4 years to continue to work together and make even greater strides on behalf of students, families, and educators. So I want to thank you all, and I know you all have a tight agenda, so depending on what you all think, I'm more than happy to open it up for questions or discussion.
I have two questions. The first, you were talking about the 30 and 40% for middle school and elementary school.
Yeah.
What about the high school?
Yeah, so for high school, what we talked about from the beginning is that we very much want to have a growth metric for high schools, but the current configuration of our assessments did not make that possible in the first year of the STAR framework. So because PARCC is a course-based test, and because it's only given once in high school, and because students take the high school test at different points in time, we did not have the technical ability to generate a growth measure from the data we had available in the first year. We are continuing to look at all options for what it might look like to have a high school growth measure in the future. We talked about that in our state plan. It is very much something that we are very strongly committed to developing at OSSE, but we need to also make sure that it's a technically sound and valid measure. We have a technical advisory committee made up of psychometricians, similar to other state education agencies. We continue to work with that TAC to look at what other ways that we might be able to develop a high school growth measure in the future.
Is the PARCC has to be given?
Every state must give a standardized state assessment.
I understand that.
And though we chose PARCC as the assessment for DC, both OSSE and the State Board of Education chose PARCC as that measure. I'm proud that PARCC was the first assessment in the country to meet expectations through the U.S. Department of Education's peer review process, which was initiated under the Obama administration. Ways in which it was developed in partnership with higher education faculty to make sure that it is truly preparing our students for first year success in post-secondary education. So more than happy to have a longer discussion on PARCC in a future date, but I strongly believe in the quality and the validity of that assessment and believe that it's been externally validated as well.
Just a question, is there a timeline on the high school growth measure? My recollection is it was something was supposed to come back to us at the end of the spring. Am I remembering correctly?
Come to this year, but we'll be working on the agenda timeline for when it comes forward.
But
This school year.
So at some point this.
Correct.
With respect to the STAR reports and the school report cards, I know after the rollout, I had received some questions from constituents about information that they felt was incorrect in the report card place, sort of portion of the report. And I had heard from folks at OSSE that there was to be an opportunity for LEAs to correct that data and for the rollout to happen. Can you just talk a little bit about where you are in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key areas we heard about, just to make sure everybody is clear, were around some of the programmatic information about schools. So for example, whether a school offered AP courses or not, the school photos in a couple of cases, and other information like that. So sort of the descriptive information that was on the front page of the school profile, which is very important, but I want to make sure to distinguish that from sort of the validity of the core data metrics around STAR framework, about which these questions were not raised.
Correct.
But those areas are very important. We wanted to make sure schools had the opportunity to update them. They had the opportunity in the fall to review and validate the data, but because this was the very first year, there were many data points and information fields to update. Some of those had gotten overlooked. And so we did want to give schools that second opportunity. We did do that earlier this month. The window for making those corrections closed on Friday, so we're working right now to, with our partners who operate the website, to make sure the data file is complete, send it over, and we expect to have those updates, I think, by the end of the month. Yeah, by the end of the month. And we will be sure to let you all know as soon as they go live.
Great, thank you very much.
Was there a mechanism to make sure that schools that didn't provide it, I'll talk about Cardozo since I was there. On the report card, it said Cardozo had no AP classes, since I taught AP there for 25 years, I know that's not true.
Yeah.
It also said that there weren't any students were from military families, and we had students from military families. But if you got a report that's got 0, was there any kind of a mechanism set up so that there'd be a double check on that school and say you reported this as 0? Is that true?
So as the state education agency, we do our work around validation through the local education agency. Every single local education agency had to affirmatively sign off on their review and confirmation of the data and metrics. So in the case of Cardozo, DCPS, as the local education agency, signed off on the validity of the data and metrics that they were given for review. We are having ongoing conversations with DCPS about how they might want to, how we can support them in making sure that the further checks are made available and ways in which they may want to involve their schools as well. I believe they did work with their schools for this second round of review, particularly around programmatic information.
One other question. I was under the impression that the federal law required in the first report card that states had to report the actual per student expenditure at the school level.
It's actually required by the second year, so we are
So it'll
working
be
on that.
done next year.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah, so it will be using the data from this school year, and it will appear on the report card next
Just to
year.
be clear, so that's gonna tell all of us on a school by school basis how many actual dollars are spent in that school, not
That's-
average teacher salary, not
Yeah, it's actual expenditures.
So that's gonna be very useful. The other thing I did wanna really thank you for, because it's really robust conversation back and forth. Some have been on Twitter, some have been email, people really trying to come to understand it. I myself have my own list, which I've shared with some, of sort of how we rank schools based on MGP versus the STAR, so I think there's a lot to learn, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's our goal to, one, have the very visually friendly, easily accessible public website, but to also think about other ways we need to make the data and information available and accessible for other places.
In terms of design, I just wanted to mention it. For instance, I went on the first day to Baloo's page, and it had like a photo of like the old building instead of the new one. And
Those were part of what we made available for the second round of, again, the validation, so hopefully those will all get approved.
I've heard from some schools that are receiving grant supports based on their rating. Can you speak to timeline or outreach that ASI is doing for certain schools to support given where they fell in the rating?
Yeah, absolutely. So the grants that were made available are for the comprehensive support type 1 schools, which are the schools that score in the bottom 5% of overall STAR rating. So that was 10 schools across the city that were eligible for those funds. We have been working with those LEAs and schools since really before the announcement for the anticipated schools and since the day of the announcement for the actual schools. They have, before even the announcement was finalized, we had shared with everybody the template documents that people would need to submit to access those funds. There's a very short submission that they need to do by February to unlock the initial planning money, and then by May they need to complete much more robust plans. That gives a needs assessment, so looking at their data within the school, having conversations with educators in the school, students and families, and then the rest of the school staff and so on, to do a needs assessment and then create a plan for how they want to use the money. The money is at least $1 million over the next 3 years per school. And so they will create a plan around how they will use that money to address the needs that come up through their needs assessment. And that is significantly more money concentrated at the school level than has been available before. And it is making it available now on a 3-year basis so that people can really plan for it and do things like add staff in a way that they couldn't before because the amount
So
was
it's
too small.
1 million divided by 3 years or 1 million times 3?
$1 million divided by 3 years, so $1 million over a 3-year period. But just to give you a sense of comparison, under the ESA flexibility waiver, the priority and focus schools generally got between $60,000 and $80,000 per year. So much smaller amounts, very hard to do things like staffing, and they were year to year.
And the plan, the plan created from that needs assessment, is there any flexibility from year to year, or are they kind of locked into whatever plan we agree to?
I believe there's a chance to make adjustments on the budget year to year. So yeah, I don't think I think we would kind of consistently work with them.
With LEAs, especially on the DCPS side, talk to them about what additional supports they might be providing as like a match, as a direct result of kind of the star rating.
Yeah, I mean, we've absolutely had those conversations. I know DCPS is thinking about this a lot, both from the resource perspective as they're, going through that 2020 budgeting process, but also from a staffing and attention perspective. So I think those conversations are ongoing. Well, thank you all. I'm sorry to miss the public meeting this month, but Shauna, I should have introduced Shauna Young, my chief of staff, and Justin Tooley, special assistant for legislation and policy. You'll be seeing a lot of both of them. Shauna will be in the public meeting in my stead this month, and I look forward to seeing you in February. Thank you all so much. Look forward to working with you. Thanks. Have a good one. Thank you. Oh, they were just internal notes.
Thank you. Members, prior to us moving to the next item, if everyone could move their placards so they can be seen on the camera, that's why we have to move them. Exactly. Thank you very much. So the next thing on the agenda is the teacher and principal retention. Scott, if you can come up here. I have a card for you. We'll switch out some folks. In your packets, there are two. There are two items for teacher and principal retention. The first is the memo that the staff prepared for you in December, and the second is the recommendations document. Thank you. The recommendations document that we've prepared based on the initial work, the forum, and the Tri-Sider online survey. And Scott's here to help provide additional information as well as answering any questions that we also have. So thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, of course.
Would you mind doing a quick 5-minute first?
So, I believe everyone has two documents, correct? So there's the overview, and then there's also the LPI.
Did you receive the LPI
by
in
email?
their email? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna. There's 4 areas of recommendations in the state board report that we put together. I'm going to jump a little bit between them because I'm going to use the LPI report as the basis for talking through a few of those. And the reason is the LPI report gets much more specific as to the specific recommendations and what jumping off points might be for the board. There's 4 areas on here. These were really, when we came out of the forum with the 100 or so people that were there, all the additional information that we got on the online voting and feedback following the forum. 4 areas of consensus that really developed that the State Board of Ed staff working together with us could synthesize. So I'm going to start with the data and transparency because I think this is an area where I think there's some consensus that there's a lot more that we need to do still to really fully understand the issue. We in the Learning Policy Institute reports, I was working with Ryan Saunders, who was also at the forum, and one of the things that came out was ensuring the district is collecting full teacher workforce data and they're sharing it publicly. So he talks about a few examples for both teacher preparation data, data on the diversity of the workforce, and then also kind of later gets into data about school culture, teacher leadership data. So I wanted to start with just kind of a bullet point list that I've taken out of both this and then teacher feedback that we've collected over the past week or so, directly from teachers about what are the data points that we still think we're missing. And I think then after we go through this, I'm happy to kind of do it back and forth on each point, or we could do it at the end. But if folks have additional thoughts about what data points we're missing. So the initial list that I have is, first of all, there's exit survey data. This is particular to DCPS because they're taking exit survey data whenever a teacher transitions out. That full exit survey data obviously would be extremely beneficial in looking at teacher turnover and retention. We don't have that for each of the charter LEAs. Some of them take that data and some of them don't take that data, but trying to solicit a broader array of data I think would be really helpful. One thing that's important, and I'll get to this a little bit later in the list, is we don't exactly have mobility information. So if a teacher transfers choice to leave a school and move to another school. So that's another existing gap in what we know about retention. The second thing is school turnover rates themselves. As you all know, because you commissioned this report from Mary Levy, this is painstaking work to try to figure out what the teacher retention rates are, and she will tell you herself they're not perfect because we're trying to match up rosters from year to year instead of having a common definition of what it means to leave. And using that common definition for the schools to report themselves what their turnover and retention rates are and have those be verified. The third thing is teacher demographic information. So this is really important, not just in terms of racial demographics, but also we want to know where teachers are coming from, where those teachers are living, other factors that are really important, age of teachers, and then get into teacher And then pathways into education is extremely important. That comes out a number of times in this report, and it's something we don't have great data about, but I think it's really, there's consensus that we need in knowing if people come through traditional certification programs, whether they're coming through university, inspired teaching, urban teachers, TFA, and how the pipeline into teaching affects the length of their stay in their career and the struggles they might have in the profession. And then I talked about mobility. And one last thing is I've talked to Asi a little bit about this recently. I think they're in the process of trying to have a universal teacher ID number. So that would be a huge help because that would then track teachers throughout the system. So if teachers are moving from charter to DCPS or vice versa, we would know that teacher movement as well as their pipeline, years of experience. So that's a point of information, but also advocacy because we're not there yet in having that information. Any questions just about the kind of missing data points?
I have one about the universal teacher ID because it immediately thinks, I got to thinking you could use that then for de-identifying data and making much more available for research.
Yeah.
But what are the barriers to that? Like who's against it and why? Or what stands in the way?
So I've only had one conversation with them about this last week, and that's the first time I'd heard that they're starting on that track. So it'd be great to ask Hansel and others about where they are with that. So, and I think for them, it's to track a lot of data better than they've been able to track it teacher by teacher right now. I think as with a lot of things, the goal isn't necessarily to make that public or to do like aggregate data reporting from it. But I think if we're going to study a specific issue, you'd want to be able to do aggregate data from it. So I don't know if it's their intention to go in that direction, but I think probably be of interest to the board how that data can be used or not used. And to make sure that that's a kind of fail-safe identification across sectors. Teachers transfer.
The system has changed PD, the old device PD, but it seems to be that like a 15-minute sit down and fill out a survey on the PD day for all the teachers in DCPS would be painless, and you can find out a lot of information. From reading these papers, there's a lot of information that you just don't have
Yes.
about somebody.
And I think that's a starting point, right, for getting into this turnover retention work more, is there's so much information we don't have to know what the contributing factors are, right? So I think we know from the national research, from what we've done research locally, that we have these repeating themes of what the factors are. But I'm going to get into this a little bit more. But one thing we really don't have is school level data, and that's incredibly important because the reasons are not just district-wide reasons. Right? It has a lot to do with the culture of the school, and as we see in all the exit survey, I mentioned before we don't have the actual exit survey full data, but Bellwether Education, and I think there's probably been some others in the past, have been commissioned to use the exit survey data to come up with some broad findings. And what we have from that is instructive, that we continue to see that relationship with administrators or school leaders is the #1 factor. So that means, I think, that we need a lot more school level data, right, about why teachers are staying or leaving based
And
on
a lot of the data we don't have comes from administrators that don't want to make themselves look bad because they've lost teachers.
Right. So I mean, I think we can talk about surveying, but I think so. We are pioneering a survey now that we're vetting that gets specifically to school culture and factors that contribute to retention. So I think having a universal survey tool, and the Learning Policy Institute mentions that there's a similar survey in other states. All we have right now is Insight, which looks at instructional culture, but it doesn't look at kind of adult culture, morale, retention factors specifically. So I think having an instrument like that that's universal across the schools, that we don't necessarily have to get into a back and forth about why we're doing that work, right, in a school, right? We would just be universally implemented. Anything else about the data? So the next piece on here is kind of, he talks about diversifying the teacher workforce. I won't get into all of that, and some state level examples. One of the other broad factors, you have this on the State Board of Ed Empower Ed report, is distributive leadership and empowering teachers is one of the other buckets. So one of the big things that came out of the looking at state and district level examples of this is principal preparation programs and how they prepare teachers to be able to distribute leadership, to empower their teachers, to build a positive school culture. I think we all know kind of anecdotally from working with school leaders, there are school leaders who come from a background where culture rises to the top of their priorities, and there are other leaders that come in primarily driven by the desire to be an instructional leader, right? And those dynamics can play a big part, right, in how important they take teacher turnover, teacher retention, building a positive school culture. And so one of the areas that's pinpointed in both of our recommendations here is thinking about teacher and principal preparation programs and how we need to integrate this work into that, so people come into their profession understanding how to distribute leadership effectively, how to listen to a broad array of voices. And then another thing that comes up frequently is career ladders. So I think this is a place that we want to be careful looking at the research. We've implemented a career ladder here, right? That's an example for other states. I think we have to, why I say be careful about that is teacher leadership, if you look at a lot of these different examples, and what we know from our work is that it can be implemented very authentically, and there's other ways to implement teacher leadership work where teachers are implementers, right, of policy. And so I think the career ladders that really retain teachers are career ladders that set up teachers to take on a variety of issues that they've identified along with their principals as areas where the school needs growth. In our teacher leadership innovation program as part of DCPS, we actually started doing that work initially. So teachers were able to get release time to take on an area of growth that their principal and that teacher had agreed upon. The teacher would get release time from teaching to work on school climate, to work on an instructional initiative, to work on family engagement. They've partnered with Flamboyant. So we then reduced that role within the TLI program to only be teachers taking on instructional roles, right? So when the LEAP program started, the TLI role became a LEAP lead role. And so virtually all of the money dedicated to the Teacher Leadership Innovation Program was designated for LEAP. And so teachers were instructional leaders, but they could not get release time to work on other school initiatives. We've heard a lot of positive feedback of teachers that have worked with us in our teacher council, teachers who participated in TLI when they were able to do a broader array of leadership options. And one thing we know from this data and from that bellwether report is teachers of color in particular cite lack of ability to take on leadership roles as a top reason for leaving. See if there's anything else on. So time for professional learning, and this is another area that affects LEAP and implementation. And both, I would say, both on the professional learning and mentorship options, which get mentioned in state level examples. These are, I would follow the same kind of line of logic, that there's ways to implement them where they feel like mandates, and there's ways to implement them where they feel organic. And I think it's really important when you're looking at the other state models to figure out how much teacher voice and teacher leadership there is in actually designing what those roles look like. With the LEAP program, certainly it's based on a lot of research that teachers who are spending more time collaborating together are producing more effective outcomes for their students. But there are teachers taking on leadership roles to do that without getting release time. There's no mandate around what release time is designated. And so you'll see in some of the other examples that are spelled out in the LPI report, there are places where you're simply adding hours or days to a teacher's schedule to be able to take on those opportunities. And I think you'd probably find mixed results as to whether that retains them over the long term, the sustainability of those kinds of roles. Any questions about those teacher leadership or distributing leadership recommendations?
So are we going through the recommendations?
I'm sorry, I'm kind of hopping between them, but I was looking at teacher and data and then distributive leadership.
So can I ask this partly,
Yeah.
this partly, I guess, to Karen, is I gather we're supposed to be voting on these recommendations in 2 weeks, is that what I understand from next
Next
week's
week, yeah.
agenda?
That's up to me.
So when are we gonna discuss the specific recommendations and whether we think it makes sense? After Scott talks, or?
We can do all encompassing. I mean, we've been partnering with Scott, so.
Well,
Yeah.
let me raise a couple of things just to, so on this, let's start on the first one, logistics and human resources. And, you know, the idea that we're gonna ask for tax incentives through the loan repay next on, and that the board is gonna write a letter to the mayor and the deputy mayor and the council. My sense of this is we would need a whole lot more data that said this is really what teachers want and need before we would send a letter to the mayor to make these points. So I really think sort of the first order thing here is to try to figure out how we can get a lot more understanding about why teachers are leaving. Now, maybe part of it can come through your survey. Maybe there's a need for us to do some kind of survey that goes beyond that or that's broader. I'm not sure, but it seems to me I would be reluctant to sort of put our prestige on a letter to the mayor with that level of knowledge. And then
Does it make more sense then to change the recommendation to say, draft a letter related to these and request that they do research on these topics? I mean, because it seems like the DME and the executive office of the mayor, the council would be the ones likely to write these types of programs anyway. So if they're going to fund some research to actually find that information, then maybe that's the recommendation that we make.
I mean, I guess my issue is why are these people gonna do this? I mean, I'm just not clear why our letters to these people asking them to do these things is gonna produce them doing it, as opposed to if, look, we did this one piece of research that I think really did get people's attention to say, wow, this is an issue, and we didn't understand it was an issue, you know, the deputy mayors now we're talking about it, came up in the council meetings, it's had a real impact. It seems to me to go to a next step, that we need to get a new round of research on the why, so that we can go to people and say the next set of things, like if it's really because of the incentives, or if it's because of the impact, or if it's because of leadership. And then there's really the ability to make a case, and the press would pick up the case that you do. So I'm really, it's sort of a strategy question here. I feel like we're not at the point where sending letters to these people, with the exception of the research. I mean, I do think there's a set of research things I think we can propose them to OSSI. That makes total letters out asking for things that nobody's gonna do, that's my concern.
To plan a point we talked about, in a meeting we had around strategy, Zachary, you brought up the fact that it would be helpful to look at some of the other things that council's already bringing forward. So there's a bill before council now, and forgive me, I don't remember who introduced it, around housing vouchers and housing repayment issues for firefighters, for, emergency professionals. I think writing a letter with that intent might actually get some cachet right now, because there's already this notion that we've got public servants in the city who aren't living in the city, because it's become too difficult to live in the city, too expensive. So that might be an opportunity to play on there, and a way to then insert any other things. Like, we also request research on other benefits specific to, I mean, we'd like to ask the DMV to do that.
Can you just comment briefly on the logistics piece? That was the next piece I was gonna go into, but I think what's really important about this, the piece about housing incentives or loan repayment, part of that is a big focus on retention, or on recruitment and not on retention. And so there are ways to make those incentives be about retention and not just recruitment, but that's really deep into the policy. So there are DCPS teachers who already own a house, right? If you want to retain them, you have to find some way to have those programs be benefiting people and lowering interest rates on people who already have a mortgage or people who are purchasing a new home. So just a lens for thinking about those kinds of programs is whether they would help with retention or they only help with recruitment.
And additionally, in terms of just tactics, just the recommendation to send a letter doesn't necessarily mean we have to send it immediately. You know, we can do exactly what Ruth is saying in terms of doing some more research and then compiling the letter once we're ready to send the actual letter. The vote on adoption doesn't necessarily mean we have to do this immediately. It's just that this is now an official document of the board.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense to me to figure out what we wanna do. I mean, I don't wanna split hairs on it, but it makes sense to me to figure out what are a few things that we really wanna do now that would enable us to do these things in the future, and that's a lot of what we would wanna adopt. So whether it's a series, that we wanna do a serious research project, that we wanna ask Ossie to do a specific set of things. I actually like the idea of doing something around the, if this is already happening, and to raise the retention rate, I think, for Scott's point. So I'm just saying, let's be concrete about what makes sense to do now, would be helpful.
And it seems like there's broad agreement that there's a lot of data that we don't have any, right? So it seems like that's all for you to decide, but it seems like there's consensus around, we could say, here's all the data that we need, and you could come to consensus about what that list is, and who you're requesting it of, and then who is out there already doing some of that work, like we're working on doing some of that survey work already. There's national groups who have done similar things already. So, and the state board could say, this is all that we want, these are the agencies who contribute to it.
And to note as well, I mean, we have been approached, and this is one of the things I was going to bring up as part of this conversation, we have been approached by Mathematica that is, they're willing to do some of the research for us for free. So that's, we're still working on it. I mean, we wanted to have this meeting to figure out what we wanted them to research, but they are willing to partner with us and do some of those programs too, as long as we're agreed on what we kind of want.
I'm for the why. And I think that's just.
I'm sorry, I can't.
The why are people leaving? I mean, I think we all have our hunches, and maybe they're right, maybe they're not right, and we need to understand really what it is so we can try to, illuminate it, bring light on it so people can come up with good recommendations, whether it's us or others.
So that's the third recommendation, is that what you're meaning? Do we need more clarification there, is that what you're saying?
Well, you were talking about the Mathematica option, so I was saying that's what I was.
Gotcha, okay.
Well, I guess I have a clarifying question that I think is sort of related to this, which is, so yeah, that's the recommendation number 3 is to collect more data, get more research, but it seems like then the other recommendations should come out of that, right, those findings. So I mean, just to Ruth's point, I guess I'm wondering if it makes more sense to do the research is what we prioritize, and then we come out with a document that makes recommendations.
To make sure, they're not in any order.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are just
But
on the page.
Are we, when we vote, are we voting on, we're doing
We
this
would-
one
no,
and this one
it's
and
just
not this
adoption,
one?
it's adopting this report as an official document.
And part of it is just saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but just saying that these are the issues, right, that came up and that the research has showed, right, both from the DCPS, DC data that we have and national data, that these are 4 issues that have risen to the top, right? So We didn't get into the last one, which we can do a little bit, but I think obviously it's logical to start with the increased research and data piece. My only caution to that, I guess, would be that you don't want to stop the wheels in motion on some things that we already know from research absolutely are contributing, right? We do have reports on the DCPS exit survey data, right? So if we know that the correlation between teachers of color leading and leadership opportunities, we should be doing something about that in the meantime. If we know that relationships with administrators are a top factor across the board, we're doing work on that now. I think, we don't want to stop the wheels in motion and the momentum to do that work that we know, right, is a contributing factor while we figure out what else it is. And I would just say, in addition to the why, it's the who, right? We don't really know who's leaving for what reason.
Right, can I jump in one more thing, which is, I'm just trying to sort of clarify the roles. So if you're doing, sometimes you're talking like what the board should do, and sometimes you're talking about what you're doing.
Right.
I wanna be, you're right, there's momentum out there, and we wanna do anything possible to help it. So maybe the way to help it is to help you to be supportive of what you're doing. That's all I'm saying. I was writing letters to say, oh, read this report. It's not harmful, I guess, but it doesn't rise to a set of actions that this board, I think, ought to be doing over time around this very serious problem.
Yeah, and
That's what I'm
I
getting.
think we're all in agreement. I mean, the potential vote next week is not to send these letters. That it's to adopt this document as what we found from the forum and the tri-sider as options to then do more action.
This document?
Correct.
Yes.
Can I ask a question then about some things that are in the Empower Ed piece that appear less often in our recommendations that I'm curious about? So there's a couple pieces around the teacher support, the human resources that seem like, and maybe the school climate, that are kind of sorta in empowerment and distributed leadership, but maybe not entirely. And I'm curious about how we might revise some aspect of this to include some more of things like the specific pre-hiring recruitment or ongoing support, and whether or not that seems like something we think matters, whether to ask more questions about it or to encourage DCPS and charter LEAs to consider it. It's my understanding that there isn't a formal program of induction in DC public schools in the way that some charter networks have, in the way that Montgomery County Public Schools has, and so that to me is sort of a question. I'm like, that seems to come up here, but isn't as clear in our memo. I don't know if I'm the only one who sees it that way, or if there are other ways we might enhance this to better include some of those specific pieces.
I think that the number 3 should be number 1.
The data and research.
The data, because everything is going to flow from that. So I think that if we have to, and I also think that if it's directed, that it needs to be directed to, if it just says directed to OSSE, does that mean that it goes to OSSE, that means it goes to all the DCPS schools, it goes to all the DC charter schools?
No.
Okay, because in order for this to work, everybody has to be involved. And this data that we don't have is so important, because just in all these reports, and I did read them, by the way, is you're talking about, what do we know about teacher preparation before they ever step in a classroom? There's nothing in there about mentorship, really. And mentorship is the key to having teachers stay. It's not money. Now, it's mentorship. It's being thrown into a classroom, which people outside of being teachers don't really understand what it's like to going into a classroom with 25 teenagers or 3-year-olds or whatever, and being able to come out without committing suicide after the first day. Seriously. And teacher preparation, as far as I'm concerned, colleges don't provide teachers preparation to deal with live students.
My suggestion might be, because there's a lot of discussion about this, and we've got 4 brand new members who haven't had a lot of time to delve into this and offer comments and help with the resolution, should we postpone it for a month? To give everyone a little more time?
Or create a smaller group that can sit down between now and then possibly, or now. I mean, I guess part of what I wanna know from both John Paul and Scott, what's urgent on your agenda? You know, it's sort of like, I don't want us to be in the way of something, but I'd also like us to spend our time figuring out 3 or 4 really worthy things to do, which I don't think is yet here. But
Just a few points. So one, on the mentorship research, come back to your question, I think, so no doubt about the importance, right, of the mentorships, though, but if you look at the state and district, like, examples of them, there's just such a wide variety of how effective they are. So there's a lot of research to be done, to your point about having the research go first, about what kind of promoting we wanna do in that area. And then on the broader discussion about, do we do just the data, or do we take action on these other things, and what order do we do them? Where I would caution to not just like select, we're just gonna do data and then we're gonna figure out the other pieces of it, is understanding those other pieces is also key to understanding what data we need, right? So I'll take the last one, which we haven't talked about, which was reduce the emphasis of high stakes testing, teacher and principal evaluations. Without knowing from on the ground knowledge and more formal research from teachers, what are the parts of the impact evaluation, for example, of teachers and principals that we need to be studying for their effects? It's not necessarily just the evaluation system as a whole, right? So one of the things that's measured that the LPI talks about in their report is other states that have more holistic evaluation systems that look at contribution to school community, which is a very small part of our impact report, as a much larger piece of their puzzle, right? So knowing that, doing some research specifically on that first might tell us we want to do research into that specific piece. So I guess to me it's all interconnected in some way. Understanding those other 3 things that are in this report help identify what the data and research is that needs. So I started off with the best I've been able to do to come up with a bullet point list of what data we need. And so to answer your question directly, like what's my wish list for what we're already doing and it being supported, is what we're trying to do is get the school level data and then help schools individually improve their retention. And that's Empower Ed's role in working with schools, is using this survey tool, figuring out where they are in school culture, and working with the schools to help improve retention. And obviously we need all the support we can get for schools to see the value in that, and the momentum around the issue helps schools see the importance of doing that work. And then of course, teacher voices about what kinds of things directly would retain them, and elevating the more diverse voices in that conversation.
Can I just very quickly, so I'll just say, I think I agree that there's much more data and much more context that we need to offer a comprehensive and full set of recommendations and suggested actions that will really get to the root of this problem. I think though what's important is that this, I think, acknowledges, or I think even with some tweaks can acknowledge that with the information we currently have, right, that these are the issues, right, and given the information we have, which is not an insignificant amount of data or context or information, right, it's not complete, but it's not insignificant, right, if we say these are the things that can help, right, our state and individual LEAs and individual schools move the ball right now, right, even with the awareness and I think the intention to do more and to get more information, right, I think that's important. You know, the conversation I think that's important today, and I think maybe to Jack's point over the next 3 or 4 weeks, right, are with the information that we have, with the data we have, are these, right, with what we currently have, are these the best recommendations, right now, moving forward? And so, I don't know if I've sensed yet a consensus on whether we totally believe these are, but I think that's probably the appropriate conversation, right? With the data that we do have, with the conversations that we have had, with the work that we've done over the past 5 or 6 months, right? Are these things that we know or that we should recommend that would really move the ball right now, right? Because I think there's a long-term conversation, but quite frankly, there is an immediate need, right? And So are these the things that we need to do?
As like being a former teacher and knowing why I left the classroom and knowing why a lot of my colleagues left the classroom, I think this is a good, solid beginning of what hinders teacher retention. This is not everything that's involved, but a lot of it, this hits on a large portion of why teachers leave the classroom.
We're about 10 minutes over on time, and I know Dr. Sutter has to leave shortly. Are we comfortable? Is there a problem in pausing this action on this for a month?
I mean, I think it's a question to you, I don't wanna pause something that interrupts momentum that people want, I don't wanna
Then
do
can
that.
board
If
members have-
If there's not something that's immediate, then
So,
I think waiting a month and getting it right is.
To clarify, again, we can still have this as a subject on our February meeting. This is, the potential vote next week is just to adopt the staff report. It is not to do any actions, it is not to
So
do any
adopting the
letters,
report
it just
is
adopts the
just to say that
report.
we've got it. It's
We've
not
got
to say
this
we're
report
doing
from
it,
staff,
it's
yes.
specific.
And I would just, I mean,
Okay,
it seemed
then
like
I-
from Marcus and Karen that it was just like, we think this is a good starting point, we're gonna start with this, and then we're gonna do more research.
And
So that allows us to say,
partnerships, yeah.
we're gonna continue this partnership and we'll dive deeper.
But could colleagues who do have suggestions, like moving the data point from number 3 to number 1, get those comments to John Paul by COB Friday, so that we can collect those, make edits,
And have it ready for the public.
and still make sure that we meet our open meetings
But
requirements.
even without that, just know, I think there's a consensus to move the number 3 up because it's something
Yeah.
that have a.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Great job. Okay, so we're on leadership now? Leadership. So I guess this is the point that,
Yeah, is this the point, like I said in the agenda, if, you're interested in leadership and would like to make that note now, you can do that, you do not have to do so. You can do it on the dais next week if you'd like, but I thought it would be good to have an opportunity for folks to speak if they'd like to.
does anyone want to speak?
I think Marcus and I would. So, I think everybody knows that Marcus and I would like to run.
Make sure you
as-
speak up.
Okay, I think everybody knows Marcus and I would like to run for president and vice president. Let me say a few things about it. First of all, I wanna go back in time and I wanna say a few things, and I'm so glad that Hansel was here to say it. When I came on the board 4 years ago, the board had just become independent from OSSI, and there really was no infrastructure. When I came, I think there was 1 staff person, I think there were 2 staff persons, and soon there was 1 staff person. And people were trying to find office space and figure out how to hire and just lay an infrastructure. And so I think, and I just wanna say, I think that, Jack and Karen in these 4 years have really done a tremendous job of putting that in place. And I know one thing is we want to build on that the opportunity to sort of take the board to some different places to have an impact that wasn't possible, I think really is here, and that's, we want to recognize that and we want to really build on it. And I just want to note that I had a conversation with Jack, and one of the points that he did make was that back then, people didn't show up on time. And so one thing I did promise, or I do promise, is that, under us, meetings will start on time, and so to everybody else, please get here on time.
We were literally 30 minutes late sometimes for starting.
But, and to
Let's
Karen's
start
point,
with that.
also end on time too.
Motivate us that we think are really important. Among them is the teacher turnover, which we've been talking about, which is great. And so, and I've talked to pretty much everybody here in one setting or another about their priorities and what really moves them. I follow a lot of campaigns, so I know what some of the issues were. So I just want to really quickly say what I think some of the issues are that we want to focus on. It's not complete. We're going to have a retreat, so I don't want to prejudge. But I think one is the star rating. Nobody here, to my knowledge, thinks it's perfect. We have different variations and continuum of where the problems are, how thinking about list, but those are some that I picked up, pretty broadly. The other thing I just wanna say in terms of the, sort of the how, one is always on this board, an issue has been, we get together for 2 hours twice a month. It's very hard to get to know people, it's very hard to get to understand what moves them, what the issues are, how to compromise, how to reach consensus. So I would like to figure out a way for us to have more of that conversation, and I wanna actually, drag from the past an idea that Jack actually had a long time ago, which was, to have a third meeting a month that was committee meetings. So we're all here, we're in committees, we're talking, maybe we're even round robining a little bit around some issues so that we get some additional time, especially before new board members. We have so much to learn about each other, educate each other about. That would be a way to do it. So that's one thing I'm thinking about. And the other thing that I want to say is, people have asked, is there some idea of jamming through things on 5 votes? Well, let me just say, our job is to be effective. That's why we were elected. And anything is going to be more effective if there's a larger consensus. So 9 votes is better than 8, 8 votes is better than 7, 7 votes is better than 6, 6 votes is better than 5. Sometimes you go with 5 votes, but you always should be doing what you can to get there. We'll have some votes that are 5. I hope we'll have many more that are unanimous or consensus or 79. That's how it's been in the past, and that is certainly how I would want to go forward. So just want to throw all that out. Pass it to Bob.
Hi, so I have a question for you guys because, Ruth, I did not know that either of you were interested. In fact, I got a text from you this afternoon that said you wanted to talk to me. I have not spoken to you at all about your intentions, and I have not collaborated with you on any of those issues. So you are unfamiliar with my ideas or background or knowledge of any of those issues. I know you've spoken with other members of the board, but me, myself, and you have not. In fact, that agenda is interesting to me because I would like to know how both of you plan to be facilitators for this entire board, which means that you are speaking to all students and all wards and all members who represent this board. Not just your own agenda, not just a particular sect of the population or a particular sect of our educational opportunities and students who we represent in this city. If you could elaborate on that, I would really appreciate it.
I can do that. Should we hear first from Marcus, or are there other candidates?
And I can leave it in, I can leave my response in a little bit just as I kind of speak. So one, I think, I'm excited about the opportunity, if I get the confidence of my colleagues, to serve as vice president. I think that the conversation around public education over the past year, over the past 2, has tremendously shifted. And I think there's become an increased urgency around the future of public education in our city. But I think what we've all seen, and especially the folks who are new to this board but have gotten to have very substantive and long conversations with your constituents over the past few months, realize that our institutions haven't shifted as quickly as the conversations. And my hope is that under our leadership, we can begin to do the work of working with all of our colleagues to shift our institution to fit the conversation. I think we have an opportunity more than any other institution in our government to do that in an effective way. When it comes to public education, we are the closest in touch with our constituents. We have our ears closest to the ground. And I think both statutorily, but from our bully pulpit, have the opportunity to drive conversations that matter to all of our students and all of our families. And I think we can do that with the right focus, with the right vision by all of us. My hope is that, personally, Ashley, my hope is that over the past 2 years, I have while we always may not agree, I'm always open to principal discussion. And my hope is that under our leadership, we can make the board a space for principal discussion, with the full awareness that we might not always agree, but that we use this body and this table as a space to have those discussions. I think we've been able to do that increasingly better over the past couple of years that I've been on this board, but I think that there's more opportunity and that there's more we can do to really open up the conversation, to understand one another better, to really get a better picture of the issues that are facing different communities in our city, and that we leave everything on the table, and that we move our institution in a direction that really reflects the best interests of students and families. So that's my hope for the institution.
I just apologize. John Paul's gonna call me out. I'm calling in. I have to catch a flight, so
Great.
I'm gonna be listening. I just wanted to apologize.
No, it's fine.
Have a
Good
great,
luck.
have a great
Thank
district.
you.
Yeah, good luck.
And so that's my hope. I also think that as the conversations around education change, we do have to have a principal discussion and really reassess our role and our space as an institution in that, right? And that means whatever conversations we have here at the table, but quite frankly, what authority the board has or should pursue. And I think that we need to collectively discuss those things, really figure out what our role, what our space should be in this broader conversation, and quite frankly, under our leadership, but as a body and institutionally, really move more aggressively towards that, right? Not necessarily knee-jerk or irresponsibly, but for sure progressively. And I think that that's the vision that Ruth and I have to really move our colleagues together to do that. So, one, I'll start how I think we should always start when I think we have these issues. So I do apologize for not reaching out to you and expressing my intent. My hope is that before you decide your vote, right, which we have 7 days between now and then, that we get to talk about the issues that you care about, the issues that all of us care about, and really include that in a comprehensive vision for the forward direction of the board. We have had a strategic planning meeting where we heard some of those ideas, but we have more strategic planning meetings to come, and we've still got more work to do to make sure that our voices and our ideas and our thoughts and our hopes for the folks that we serve are reflective in the forward vision of the board. So that's where I am. That's where I think we are as we want to move the board forward. And I think when it comes to us really being together and making sure everybody's voices are heard, I think Ruth made some very good recommendations about how we do that, right? How we make time for more principal discussion, how we work more collaboratively, how we get to know each other a little better so that the conversations are more organic. And so my hope is that we can work with you and everyone at the table to make sure that happens. And I think, just like you have frustrations, I've had, I think, the same about how we do that in a more progressive way. So hopefully we can work together to do that.
I have a couple questions. You stated that you did not like the fact that we had split boards of votes, that we didn't come to
No, that's what I said.
well, could you repeat what you were saying?
Yeah, no, what I was saying was that I think in any situation, ideally, you're most powerful insofar as you have unanimity or a consensus. I'm thinking 9 votes, 8 votes, 7 votes, 6 votes. The more you have, the better. Consensus is better. Sometimes you can't get that, and you need to go forward. That's been true in the past, that'll be true going forward, but it's not desirable.
Thank you, John Paul.
It's what you sometimes have done, just to know.
Well, in our 4 years working together, more often than not, you were the one who did not vote for whatever policy or whatever we were trying to do. As a matter of fact, I do not remember you making any positive votes on any issue that was working for. If you could correct that, my vision or my impression, I would be very
Well, I
glad
think
to
the
know.
vote that I voted in the minority was, along with Marcus, was we didn't think that the proposal that Aussie brought back, showed enough movement towards the kind of things that we had heard at our community meetings and our panels. That's
You're
sort of-
discussing the SSA accountability plan?
Yeah, so.
Just wanna make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah,
of what we're
so
talking about.
I think that's the main time I didn't vote with,
What about credit recovery? Or the diploma,
the credit
or
recovery.
the recommendation to give, diplomas to people who were finished GED courses?
Let me
Or
say-
any of those issues that?
So on the credit recovery, I believe we had a unanimous vote
that we did.
to send the credit recovery, that we didn't want to adopt the credit recovery.
I think Ruth is correct on that one.
Yeah, that one, but what about the high school diploma?
So 4 years ago, when I was first on the board, one of the things that came before us, and actually it's interesting to think of it, 4 years ago, was a set of proposals that was gonna make it much easier for kids to graduate high school and for the graduation rate to go up. There were 3 things, as I recall. One was, there was gonna be some expansion, I can't remember what it was, some expansion of something that was kind of like credit recovery, I can't even remember what it was. There was gonna be, more ability to, it was a CBE kind of thing. There was gonna be a, GED graduates were gonna get high school diplomas, and there was another degree that had no research on it and that nobody had heard of, that people were gonna get high school degrees for. And I objected, I was worried, I said, wow, this sounds to me, I was brand new on the board, I think it was my second meeting. I was brand new on the board, and I said, wow, this sounds like people are trying to pump up the high school graduation rate. And I asked for, and John Paul had just come on, I said, I think we really need to do some research about what's going on here. What are these tests, what are these proposals, and why are we doing it? We did some of it. In the end, I ended up voting for, as I recall, I had a, and I want to point this out to all of you new people, I had a very confusing vote where I think I voted no, and then I abstained, or I abstained, and then I voted yes. I did something very confusing, which I then took back. But the gist of it was, I was very concerned with the direction. I wanted to have some serious research on it. There were a number of other people on the board that had the same kind of concerns. In the end, I voted for it, but I made clear that I thought this third test that nobody had ever heard of was really inappropriate and that we should not use it. And that I hope that we get a report back about what was going on with that. So that, and I need to see a list. I raise concerns, I raise objections, on most,
So what was really important to me in that discussion?
I'm like, are we really gonna go back to my 4-year?
No,
Oh.
no, not at all. I'm talking about the good work that the board has done.
Oh, okay.
The really important part of that discussion is, for a lot of hourly jobs and minimum wage jobs, a person can't get a raise or be eligible for a management position unless they hold a high school diploma. Allowing a more rigorous GED, which it is and was at the time,
Which is why I
to
totally
allow a
am
pathway
supportive, absolutely.
for those folks who are at the bottom of our social ladder to be able to have an opportunity to get those raises and those management positions is life-changing for those families. And we've seen, I think, 270 or so graduated 2 years ago, and the 2018 numbers are gonna be coming in shortly. And those are real DC families who have more opportunity now because they have access to that diploma.
And I voted for it for exactly that reason, but I
Yeah.
think the questions that I raised also turned out to be, pretty worth raising. So, it was a good discussion, it ended up with a vote in favor of it, and students are moving forward as a result, and, it was, I would say, right to raise the concerns. But to Karen's point, you'd have to show me the votes. I mean, the big one where I really didn't disagree with people, where Marcus and I both really disagreed with people who voted in the minority, was on the ESSA. And there have been times, I will say, where we've raised some things and they didn't pass that time, but they eventually passed. I mean, we talked, for example, and I'm pulling this out of the past, so I could be wrong on this, but there was, we had a proposal to ask OSSI to disaggregate its data so that you could pull out the kids who were on TANF
I've been thinking a lot since you and I met yesterday, and this reminds me of 4 years ago this week. And it was just Karen and Ruth and I sitting around this table. John Paul wasn't even here yet. I don't think any of our staff members were here at the time. And there were 2 slates that were put forward. There was Karen and Mark, and it was Jack and Tiara. And we both wanted to lead the board. Both slates did. It was very clear through the discussions that if both slates ran, it would be a 5-4 vote. It was kind of a coin toss as to who would win, but one of us would win and one slate would lose, and it would have been a 5-4 vote. Karen and I did a lot of talking. We talked with our colleagues, and though we didn't like it and we resisted, we ultimately decided to form a consensus ticket of Karen and me. We didn't know each other well. We had joined the board the same year, but we didn't have a real personal relationship. We were sort of thrust together. But that shows how we sought consensus from the very first opportunity we had to demonstrate leadership. We looked for a way to find consensus by joining forces rather than opposing each other. Ruth, yesterday when you and I spoke, I asked you about consensus, and around that, you suggested at one point that you have the 5 votes, and we could either be with you and have a consensus of 9 votes, or we could be against you and have a 5-4 vote. I suggested, I'm going to finish my speech. I'm going to finish my speech as you did. I had suggested to you that a split vote, a consensus ticket, could get 9 votes and be unanimous and really bring the board together. Karen suggested the same thing to Marcus a day earlier, that she and he would be a fantastic consensus team that could get 9 votes, that could be unanimous. And how amazing would that be for the board and this leadership? To have the leadership team be Ward 7 and 8, where half of our children live, where the schools are struggling the most, where at-risk students need access and opportunity and equity. And what a statement that would make for this body to have that be our voice and our demonstration of leadership in education. We were told no. Flat out no. No room for negotiation, no room for compromise, no room for consensus. And I regret that. And so the last 24 hours I've been thinking a lot about it. Talked to my dad, talked to my mom, and I'm putting myself forward as president. I think that we've got a great record, Karen and I. In 4 years, we've increased the budget from $1.1 million to almost $1.9 million. It's a huge increase. Our FTE equivalents increased from 9 to 20, so 120% increase in FTEs. What that means is we can do things like a teacher retention report. We can pay for that because we've done the work and laid the groundwork to get that funding. We can work together on things like asking the auditor to work with us on a real audit of high school graduation, and we've done that. Others say we need to resist more and be opposition. I agree, from time to time that makes sense. We did that in July when the superintendent brought us what was, in all of our views, a flawed policy on credit recovery, and we voted that down unanimously. So I think what we have here is an opportunity for our 4 new board members, Fraser, Zachary, Jessica, and Emily, to decide, the 4 of you, you have the power here, all 4 of you, and you get to decide whether you want your first vote to be a 5-4 or a 9-0. And you can force a consensus ticket, and you can force a 9-0 vote. Otherwise, I'm going to be standing up and I'm asking all of you, talk to each other over the next week. I'm happy to listen to everyone. I'm going to be reaching out to each of you individually. I ask that anyone who's supporting me accept the phone calls and conversations with Ruth and Marcus as well. because we have to do these conversations, we have to do them right, and we have to move forward together. We also have to put students first, and that's unfortunately something that our student reps continue to remind us, but I didn't hear in the list of issues that Ruth brought up as important. Marcus raised students at one point, and I appreciate that very much. So that's why I'm running. I've got a record. I'd like us to go through some machinations and figure out the best leadership team for all of us, where we can really build consensus and move forward together. So thank you.
Can I just say very quickly, and this is not in opposition to your candidacy at all. I think all of our members have a decision to make with all of the information we gained today. But with that, right, I think the premise is flawed, right? I think that it assumes an immobility amongst us currently, right? That shouldn't necessarily be assumed, right? We all, for the first time in a public forum, have announced our candidacies and have asked all of our colleagues to vote for us, and for all of our colleagues to buy into the vision that we've set for the board. I appreciate the vision you've set for the board, but I'm concerned that we've started, that vision started in a place that I think doesn't assume all of our best intentions. And so I think that we formally, right, announced our candidacies today and have both expressed that we want to spend the time between now and our vote talking with our colleagues to get buy-in about what our collective vision can be. I think Ruth and I, and you have laid out what those visions can be. But we shouldn't assume that voting for one and not the other is the only solution to our issue, right? The main solution is to discuss and listen, which we have to do every day of our terms, right? And so in no way am I rejecting the premise of your candidacy and why you're doing it and the accomplishments you made. But I don't want us to leave the table with a false choice, right? That it's either, you support the two of us and it's gonna be 5-4 and it's gonna be inconsistent, right? That we won't come to a consensus, that there won't be, right, universal buy-in, and that if we wanna get to that this is the only alternative, right? And so I think there'll be a competition of ideas over the next few days, but I don't want anyone to assume that the only way to get to consensus is to make this choice, right? Or it would be a rejection of our values to make this choice, right? I think we've all got to figure out who would, with their experience, with their vision, and with the knowledge of the conversations we have today and over the next 7 days, will lead the board in the direction that our residents believe that the board needs to move in. I think we've played a lot of inside. I think the time to play inside baseball is done, right? I think we need to choose leadership that embodies the values that our residents have set, right? Because our residents have taken the lead on these conversations. I think we need to choose the leadership that is wholly responsive to those conversations and is willing to move our institution in that direction. And so I just wanted I wanted us to leave the table with that awareness that it doesn't have to be one or the other. We all have the opportunity over the next 7 days to make a principled choice, right? And that it's not one over the other.
So I do want to say that inside baseball has already happened, and the fact that you've said, oh, I already have 5 votes, it doesn't matter, means that you don't care about the buy-in of everyone on the board. And that really frustrates me, and it really upsets me, because part of being a leader is being a facilitator and being collaborative and understanding all sides, which seems to me, and I've seen over the past 2 years of being on this board, of having a particular agenda and wanting to push your own agenda as opposed to pushing the policies and making sure that the board is doing what's right by the city, not what you particularly want to do. The other thing I would like to say is part of wanting to be a leader or be leadership on the board and changing up normally means that you believe that the current leadership is not doing a good job. I would like to see, or I would like to know your opinion on why you would think you could do a better job than what the current leadership is doing now, or why that you both think that they are ineffective in their current roles.
Can I just say something really quickly? Actually, I don't also want to start with the premise that the issues that we push for personally aren't also what we believe are best for the city, right? I think we have varying degrees of opinions about what direction, what actions, what positions we think are best for the city. Now, have we always disagreed? Have we always agreed? Absolutely not. Have we been on opposite sides of the issues? Absolutely. But what I will say is that there's an additional responsibility with leadership, right?
That's right.
Now we've, I'm saying that to say that yes, we have all, not just me, not just Ruth, not just any individual, have pushed wholeheartedly for what we believe is the best interest of the children and families of the entire city.
Personally, but
Right.
as a board, as a
right.
leader, you
That's
need
right.
to be talking about what the entire board thinks, not what 5 people think.
That's right.
Not what, what you personally want to push,
That's right.
but what the board and its policies are doing.
That's right.
Again, we are a policy setting board, we're not a local school board, and we need to make sure that we are understanding our role as board members here in the city.
That's right. And when I say there's an extra responsibility that comes with leadership, right? We've all fought vigorously for the positions and the issues that we thought were best or that we cared about most. However, I think what both of us have demonstrated is our desire to have those conversations, right? To build consensus, to understand each other better, to have the conversations that matter to all of us, right? Ruth gave very practical recommendations about how institutionally we can build more spaces, right? That bring out those conversations, that bring out those opinions. Now, I think we both come into, I think we both have announced our candidacy with full awareness, right? That with the responsibility of leadership, we not only have a responsibility to ourselves as individual members, but to the institution. And both of us have talked at length about how we want to make sure that the institution is having the conversations we need to have, but is fully reflective of everybody's voices. Now, like I said, I understand that we have not been on the same side of each issue, but like I said.
That's not what, no, I don't care whether or not we're on the same side of each issue. What I care about is being fully reflective of everybody's voice on this board, which from the agenda put forth and already the conversations that have been had with 5 members apparently, because you already have the votes, you've told other people.
Jack, let me just say, Jack described that, I actually had a different view
I've heard it from other people on this board, so that's, I'm not, you know, what I don't like is that there is already inside baseball going on, and I don't appreciate that whatsoever. All right, if you want to be a leader, you actually have to talk to everybody ahead of time, not just announce your candidacy and then say, oh, in 7 days, I want to talk to you more. Well, that's great. You know what, but you've already talked to several other people on this board about, will you vote for me? But you didn't care enough to talk to everybody on this board.
I need to, my view of what's happened is actually quite different, both from what you described and from what Jack described. And I don't wanna get all into the, I mean, I talked to some people, you know, ultimately, if you're talking to people about what your agenda is and why you would run, you're gonna talk to people consecutively. You're not gonna call everybody together. I talked, you know, to a number of people at various points to sort of get a sense of whether this made sense. I started by talking to Marcus and I talked. We talked to others just to see if this made sense. We decided it did. Yesterday, Jack has been away. I was able to sit down with Jack, and I would say, contrary to the way Jack portrayed it, we sat together for over an hour, and I certainly very much have the impression that what we were doing was going back and forth about ideas, trying to understand how we would lead things in a way that were not exclusive. And I certainly did leave the meeting with much more of a sense that Jack was likely to be supportive. But and that's his choice whether he runs or not. But what I want to make clear is that I spent a good deal of time with Jack, and then a good deal of time with Karen, same thing, walking through these issues, trying to understand where people were, I think in totally good faith. And frankly, the reason I then was, and I apologize that I didn't talk to you. I sit next to you all the time. I do have a sense of your ideas and positions. We talk about it. We've been out drinking and conferences on it. I wasn't able to call you earlier because frankly, one of the things I did want to do was see if we could all have a consensus before I went all the way out. And that's what I was trying to do, and that didn't work. That was my, I thought that was the right way to do it because I think it would be better to have a consensus than not. Apparently that's not what's happening. But that's why I did it that way. It was not to freeze you out, it was rather to be fair to our current leaders and to the discussion with everyone. So I just wanted to say that. And then,
can I just say something as one of the new board members? And no, I'm not throwing my hat in the ring. But and Ashley, your point is well taken. I do think for anybody, and it sounds like both Ruth and Marcus are apologetic for not including you.
Zachary, I know you've been spoken to, and I know other board members have already been.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm saying.
I find it interesting that board members who have, today is your first working session, and that you've already been spoken to about leadership. You've already been discussing this. There is been inside baseball going on. When someone who's been.
I would not characterize it, and that's in part why I wanted to speak, because I do not want to give the impression that there is inside baseball or teams. To my knowledge, Ruth and Marcus are the only two running. I have not explicitly had a conversation with anyone, but I also want to make it for me, or personally, that I speak for myself, and I am not part of some inside baseball network or some 5-vote slate or all of the concerns that go along with that, and I want to make that clear for everyone, and that I do not plan to ever be part of some go along with the flow type of voting system. Not that I think Ruth and Marcus is portraying that. That said, I do think it is unfair that when two board members announce their candidacy, they are attacked, or at least that's what it feels like to me, that they're being attacked. And I think it's within everyone's right to run should they want to. I think your concern is fair. I didn't hear about this before. I think they both apologize, but it does seem almost, unfair seems to be the word, or I would just leave it at unfair that when two board members who have every right to run, and it almost seems like how dare you run or announce your candidate, not necessarily from you, but the vibe that is presented, whereas everyone else has a right to present why their vision and why they would want to run. And then last, I would just say everyone has the power of the vote, and that while consensus as a board is important, I think each of us as representatives come to this board with one vote. And as Ruth mentioned, there will be times when that vote is everyone in unanimous support of something, and there will be other times where it may be 5 votes against the others. Whenever it is 5 votes, and not to say that everyone is locked in step with Ruth and Marcus, I do not want the impression from the conversation that I took away is if there is ever a 5-4 vote, then that must not be consensus. Because there have been 5-4 votes before that I very much speak for the direction of the board, and the tone that has been set here, I just want to put on record is, should there be a 5-4 vote for Ruth and Marcus, that it is an explicit, at the explicit displeasure of several board members, which I think is unfortunate. So all that to say, if others, Jack, I'm happy to speak with you personally. I can't speak for others. If any other board members are interested in running, I'm happy to hear your vision and moving forward. But I would hope that everyone would be considered should they be interested.
But I do want to again underscore that I think your concerns actually are valid, right? That you want the board to be a space where everybody's voice has equal weight, where everybody's voice is heard, and where in that when we come to a decision as a board, that the institution supports that. I just want to underscore again that I believe, and I think from what you heard hopefully, is that I believe Ruth has, and for sure I believe that I have, laid out in very practical ways how we want to make the board that space, right? And to be quite honest and to be very frank, right? The board hasn't necessarily been that space, right, over the last 2 or 4 years, right? Not comprehensively and not as well as it could be, to your question, right? It hasn't always been that space. And to be quite honest, right, where you might feel maligned now that you feel like you're on the losing end of a 5-4.
Losing end?
No. I know. I just want to say, whereas you might feel maligned that you feel like you've been put into, right, this box of a minority, or that there's been this conspiracy, right, to pit certain members against another, right? I think, you know, Ruth and I can go out with you and talk all day long about how over the past 2 years we felt right that way. But I think what we've demonstrated is that our intention is to make the board a more open space for principled discussion, that at the end of the day, folks feel like they've had their voice heard, and that they have the confidence that the leadership will support the institution over all interests. And I think what we've demonstrated and what we've said is that we have a commitment to do that, right? We want to make the board a better space for those conversations, and we want to support the institution in better serving its members, but also all of our residents and families. That's the vision we've laid out, and my hope is that we can talk with you more about what that looks like in your eyes. I think we've laid out practical ways, and there's nothing beyond tweaking. But I think that's the intent that we've set, right? That's the vision we've set, and I get it, right? Because I felt very practically the same way you feel. But I don't think there's been a clear line. I don't think our perspectives are necessarily 100% correct. So those are conversations we've got to have personally. But like I said, on the merit of the vision we have for the board, I think your hopes, I think, are what we're trying to create. And so I hope we can talk a little bit more about that.
Two questions. Point of history, for previous votes for board leadership, what have they been historically? I know that's hard to recall probably.
I mean, how many people voted?
Yeah.
So the first time we ran, we had 2 defections. The other 3 times it was unanimous. Yeah, we run every year. Yep. And just so that everyone's aware procedurally, the dean of the board takes the gavel. That would be me. I was sworn in about 10 minutes before Karen was. And facilitates the conversation and the nominations. For president alone, there's nomination or nominations, and either a roll call vote or a voice vote if there's only one nomination. And then the president takes the gavel, and then there is a second vote on vice president. And then it's the same process. The president takes nominations for vice president, and then the vice presidential vote is held, either a roll call if there are multiple candidates, or by acclamation if there is just a single candidate.
Also,
Any questions on that?
Second question.
Yeah.
When you did the mixed ticket before, what caused that? Was that you were
Same-
doing,
same
or
si-
was the board urging you to do that?
That was the same situation where there were 4 people, well, there were 4 people who were 2 slates, 2 different slates. And, Ashley was your Ward 5 council,
Board member.
predecessor, who was running for president. And so, and he had asked me to be his vice president, and Jack was running for president, and I don't remember who. Tierra, right. And so it was decided that rather than split the vote, that Mark would acquiesce to Jack and I would become his vice president.
Can I just, there was my very first meeting, wasn't that fun? The way it was, the way I would say that we understood it as the new people was actually quite different. What we knew, was Jack had approached us, to vote for him. We didn't know whether or not there was any opposition. We had no idea that there were 2 slates, that came together. So I just want to be clear on that. It's not like there were 2 slates and the new people were consulted. It was very much, not something that we were part of. And then on the dais that night, as it turned out, only Jack ran and only you ran, but that was not, just to be clear.
I think that's what we stated, that we came to.
Yeah, but we didn't, the rest of us didn't know about it. I wanted to be clear, it wasn't,
And rather than having this type of discussion, we handled it in a different way.
But how did you know that it would be, you knew it would be split even with the new members?
Talking about now?
No, then.
No, then.
Like, you were saying that it was clear that if you did it this way, it would have one outcome, whereas if you did it this other way, it would have this other outcome. And
Conversations I had with Mark. I think that was it, my conversation with Mark Jones. And we had a lot of those conversations. I made a couple trips to Ward 5 and had some great coffee up there, and knocked on his door several times until we found a path forward that was not ideal for anyone, but worked the best for everyone.
It wasn't the visit.
And also, to Ashley's point, I just want to say, the campaign season just opened, so there's a week, that's, so there's time. The only thing that was talked about was whether people were gonna run, and there was an effort to reach you, so we have the week, and like I said, I just want to be very clear, because I totally want it, be great if in the end it was a consensus, whether it's a consensus or not, whatever. Whoever wins, we want to run this as a, to Marcus's point, there needs to be a lot of discussion, there needs to be a lot of open discussion, there needs to be a coming together around some of these issues. They're tough issues. People, and I would say, to Jack's point, I think I did talk about kids. I talked about the kinds of issues that I wanted to raise, because I think they're going to matter to kids. I talked about kids not getting social studies and science. I care about that. That's a kid's issue. When schools get closed down because perhaps they're step along the way. We got a city council that is now, for the first DC council, that is now for the first time since I've been on, really genuinely focused on education. The opportunities we have to work with them, I think, are pretty substantial. And, yeah, we'll be better off if we have, going forward, if everybody's in one place. But you know what? We're gonna get there either way. I don't, because we care about the kids in the city.
So, Ruth, go ahead, Fraser.
Because I'm completely new at this, but I'm not new at leadership. And I don't really care who the president and vice president is of this at all, because it has nothing to do with the decisions that we're going to make. Right? Because it's not like, Mike Pence can overthrow the votes or anything like that. We're gonna be voting, and they're gonna be votes that you have to have a certain number of votes to set a policy or approve a policy. All right. And I didn't run to just have the State Board of Education be just a policy. I think that the State Board of Education should have more power than it does right now. That it should have something to do with who the new chancellor is. That's not in concrete yet, as far as anything. But I think that this whole conversation is fascinating to me. It's not like I haven't been in situations where I've been running for presidents of foundations and things like that, where I did with these kinds of conversations. But once the decision is made and the person is elected president and vice president, then what it's about is us getting together and deciding on the policy. All right. So I think this is very valuable as far as what's going on tonight, and that whoever becomes the president and the vice president will get to bang the gavel. But that's not what it's about. It's about the children of this city in the public and charter schools getting the best education that they can get. Period. And we, as the State Board of Education, are the only elected officials besides the mayor that have anything to do with education. And there's that big hierarchy of everybody who's got education in their title, right? But we're the only ones that are elected. And so our job is to have these conversations and decide on what's best for the children of the district.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Fraser. I think where the form of leadership and who is president or vice president, where it does matter is when we are speaking to other agencies and other bodies, and the president is the only one who speaks on behalf of the entire board. And so when I want to make sure that person is speaking to all of our views, not just his or her own, and that's why I questioned it.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's possible. I don't think that should be possible that the president should espouse any kind of views that the board doesn't agree on. All right?
Exactly.
And if that would happen, then I'm older than anybody, and there'll be a revolution.
I think making sure that our leadership reflects the ability to have collaborative and thoughtful conversations with members of different agencies that I've seen in the past some board members be openly hostile to certain agencies has concerned me. That's the only reason I questioned any of this. But you're right, in a sense, and ultimately, it really doesn't matter who is president or vice president, because my vote still counts just as much as everyone else's. Like Zachary said before, we all have one vote. So.
Another point of question: should some are there measures or procedures where you can reprimand the president, vice president, or remove them?
In the bylaws, we currently have censure procedures. One of the proposals that I was actually going to talk about later in the bylaws section is to move that to our policies rather than bylaws. And just note in our bylaws that members could be censured under certain provisions. So we can talk about that specifically, the provisions of that later.
And there's also a provision.
What about removed? So,
No, that's,
yeah.
I think that's incorrect.
Well, I guess to Ashley's point, if, not that this would happen, but hypothetically, if a leader espoused something that was not reflective of the board's position, what position would the board have to retaliate beyond the censure?
The board always has.
Or I think without rooting that question in any assumptions about anyone, right?
No.
If a leader of the board does something that is just unbecoming of their office, right? I think that's where we should.
That was
So
brought up in our meeting the other day about I think John Paul was talking about the only provision in the bylaws or whatever is that if someone does something that's
A misdemeanor or misappropriation of funds or felony, and there are some provisions in there. I helped write them when I was an ANC commissioner for DuPont Circle, and we put in some provisions about leadership removal. We thought it was important. We had a chair of our commission. We'd taken a vote that was unanimous, and the chair wrote his own letter on behalf of the commission and sent it in. I didn't think that was right, so we beefed up our oversight provisions in our rules and regulations. The president generally serves for one term, but that's not to say that the board couldn't take another vote on leadership. I never want us to get to that point. I don't, unless there's a crime or gross violation, I don't see that's good for the students that we serve, and I don't think that's good for the reputation of the board.
And I think it's an unhealthy conversation to start with, right? I mean, we're at our first meeting of the year. And really, like I said, and I've been hoping to really just express this, right? We hear you as forcefully as I can. We hear you, okay? Just one more time, real quick. Is that we all, right, if I'm counting correctly, there are three candidates at the table right now for various leadership positions. My hope is that we can have conversations over the next week, but that we walk away from this table talking about the visions that each of us have for the institution, right? Even the question that I think, again, is rooted out of an unhealthy assumption about folks' intentions and personalities, which I reject. But the fact that that question even came up, I think, speaks to our collective concern for the institution, right? And we've all presented a vision that's not, all of us have presented a vision that's not individualistic, it's not rashly ideological. It's about how we move the board forward, how we advocate forcefully for the issues we care about, and how, while we might not always come to a consensus and we might not always agree, that there's going to be space for everybody to be heard. And that's what all of us have talked about. Over the next 7 days, we'll have to decide what visions that we all most closely align and subscribe to, and make a vote based on that. And so that's my hope, is where we leave the discussion whenever it's over, right? Is that we've all laid out a vision, and we all need to open our ears to what that vision is, and then move forward knowing that we subscribe to a vision, and that while that we have a new board, and that we should throw away, right, the old perceptions and intentions we have, and really talk about how we're going to move forward together, right? And that's hopefully where we
And my last little 2 bits is I'm happy to set aside if we can find some true consensus. The nominations aren't official until the board meeting next week. Jessica could be nominated for something. She doesn't have to be here. You don't have to be participating in the conversation to be nominated next week. and be elected next week. And I'm gonna try and work with all of you to figure out the best path forward for the board as a whole.
I just want to say, as we did yesterday, I'm very keen to sit down with you and figure out a consensus in terms of where we want to go forward. Because that's what you think.
And I'm still gonna give you a hug like I did yesterday.
All right. Okay, next item on the agenda is the blog strategy.
Great. So in your packet.
I object.
So in your packets is a material. Alex, do you want to come up with or do you want to talk from there? I mean, I can talk. Can people hear me, Doctor?
Yes.
Okay. So quickly, so there's a document here that just outlines some ideas on what we can do with the SBOE blog, recognizing that we have 4 new members that have joined us, how we can ensure that they're aware of the blog. But really, I think one of the things that we really want to focus on, moving forward is that the blog is really featuring, not just the policy-based work that we're doing as a board, but also, the site visits that the board members are doing, opportunities for you all as board members to share board-specific work that you're doing, an important issue of work with respect to your board, and knowing that it's a place for you to use your voice as a board member. And so this document just outlines some of those pieces. Would really appreciate any additional feedback on it. One thing that we are hoping to do, I think in the short term, is to have all of the new board members at least create some sort of introductory post that just introduces, who they are, be newly elected. Previous board members are welcome to do that as well. And so we'd really appreciate to have something like that before the end of the month. But yeah, so this is, again, just kind of outlines some ideas and thoughts that we have as a staff of how to really use the blog as a platform and make sure that people are seeing the work we're doing. Yeah. Any questions or comments, happy to answer them, but just something really quick. Thank you. The next item on your agenda is the annual report for 2018. A draft copy is in your packets. It's the spiral bound one. It notes it's fairly simple. It just notes the major resolutions that we passed, the work that we did in the high school graduation task force, the ESSA task force, and notes all of the resolutions that we passed as well. This will be on the agenda for adoption at the January 16th meeting. So take your time to look through it and let us know if you see any technical errors or those types of things that you'd like. Again, this is just for adoption of this report to make it an official document. Once it is adopted by the board, we'll publish it on our website and submit an official version for the council as part of our performance oversight hearings that are coming up. And we can send it to you electronically too, if that's easier for you to look at, but we figured a physical copy was good. Great. Any questions on that?
This is a really important document because this is basically what we base our performance oversight hearings on. For some reason, even though we are independently elected and we are an independent agency, the council still has oversight over us. So we have to go and explain what we did every year and why we need money every year.
I have a
So is
question.
this a
Sure.
draft? Is that?
It is as final a draft as we can make, but yes, if you have additional things or comments, please get it to us. In order to vote in the January meeting, we would need them no later, certainly by noon.
No, I was just trying to clarify whether we were supposed to discuss it or.
We certainly can.
Okay, no, I'll give it time. It looks beautiful, by the way.
Noon Monday.
I just want to say, it looks beautiful. Yes, I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth over my 4 years about what we should look like. Without reading it, it just looks very nice.
Well, I want to note that the staff members who worked diligently on the design and content of this. This was all done internally, so we even found it internally, so we didn't go to FedEx to do that. Saving taxpayer money.
I agree. My kudos.
That's about, well, we have a full staff for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Ever.
Great staff.
Yeah.
Sorry, Richard, did you have a question?
No, I can get it in the other discussion.
Okay.
This is impressive, guys. Kudos.
Thanks for mentioning that, Ashley. I do want to also note specifically the page 6 5 and 6, which is SBOE by the numbers. This is something that Paul started last year, 2 years ago? Last year.
No, 2 years ago, I guess, yeah.
Right, 2 years ago. And it lists all of the interactions that the board has had, both individually with residents, with meetings that we've held, with all these the numbers of public testimony that we've had, how many viewers we've had on our Periscope, and it's really some impressive numbers, and they're continuing to grow, which is also something of note, and I think it's something that frankly I like to applaud my staff for, because they really do a really great job of continually increasing the reach of the board, and I just wanted to note that specifically. So on to the bylaws. So we talked a little bit a second ago about some of the edits. I did get a question from Dr. Sutter, but I didn't hear from anybody else on questions related to the bylaws. If there are no questions, my suggestion would be that we adopt these in January, at the January meeting as well, as new bylaws, so we have a fresh document to work from now until they're changed again. The bylaws do require that the bylaws be updated every 2 years, and so we're sort of on cycle to do so, which is a good practice in general. But I did want to check to see if there were any other questions or comments about the changes that are made. One thing I do want to note, a lot of this information will be moved to policy, right? Like the grievance process, the censure process will be moved to policy rather than having it as part of the bylaws. It's been our practice for the new members, it's been our practice in the past to actually have votes to waive parts of the bylaws, which is not the way you're supposed to do it. You can waive policy, you shouldn't waive bylaws. So once all this is moved to policy, we'll still be able to do the same types of votes that we have in the past, to extend time, to if there's a resolution that we have in front of us that hasn't gone through the working session process, the regular order process, we can still waive that policy, but we wouldn't be waiving bylaws. Go ahead.
So my assumption, and I think you did explain this before, that most of this is going to move into policy.
Yes.
Is there anything that kind of stands out as a hard deletion in terms of recommendations? Or broad change,
No, I actually didn't delete anything. Everything that I've done is either shifted in place or has been consolidated. There were a couple places that were very repetitive, so I consolidated them into a single meetings category, for instance. So, like there was in section 4, there was an article 4 which had to do with official procedures. There was a meetings category, and then there was a special meetings category, but it was way at the bottom, and it got confusing on what types of meetings would occur, what order of things would occur, and so that was one of the things that I think that I would call out specifically.
Nothing really changes our operation. Most of these are just like a cleaning up.
Correct. The one thing that I'm glad you brought that up. We did make an amendment to the bylaws last year on participation in meetings, and we ordered it so that certain individuals would always be able to address the state board. That's another one of the things that I want to move to policy. So that we can't waive it. That's why it's not here. So I did want to make that note because we did do that officially last year.
So, I see. So this idea, just so other people understand, it used to be that if there were public witnesses who would testify,
Correct.
board members were not allowed to engage in conversation with them.
Yeah, right. The historic practice was not for board members not to be questioning public witnesses, but only those that were there for panel discussions.
And we
That's
changed. So,
changed.
Our general practice has changed now.
and so what I'm understanding is that you still have that idea, but in some policy. So
Yes.
it is still the practice unless it's waived. Is that?
It is our current practice that we have
Is it's allowed.
is that it is allowed.
And nothing here changes that.
Nothing
Okay.
here would change. Thank you. That's a really good question. And the other one that I did want to check to note that is an actual full edition is in 4.9 in parliamentary authority. We've always practiced that the executive director serves as parliamentarian. I didn't realize that that wasn't actually in our bylaws. So I put that in our bylaws to make sure that it's clear that I serve as parliamentarian for public meetings. That was what I just saw that. But we still have additional, if there's additional edits or comments, we do have until probably noon on Monday, at the latest, to look through these and check them and make sure that I didn't miss anything.
John Paul, I just want to ask Marcus the same question, but with a different word. I want to say, is there anything else in here? Is there anything in here that is substantive that you've not already asked?
I'm good.
Everything except for the couple of things that were just raised, it's really a matter of rewording, putting in policy versus bylaws.
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to say, I mean, I think bylaws are important. People should read them. They have different meanings. So I don't want to suggest people should read them, but I want to be clear that there's nothing substantive going on.
Not to my knowledge. I would note there is one other consolidation that may look like a substantive change, and that's in section 5 under committees. The changes are to the way that the committees and task forces are structured. In our bylaws previously, we didn't actually have task forces as something that was listed. It was just listed as a committee. So I added in the words task force, and then throughout the section so that it would be clear that we mean both. That the board has the authority to establish a task force as well as establishing a committee, which are used for different purposes. I really appreciate both of you asking that question. It helped me remember what I made. If there's other changes, like I said, feel free to just give me a call or send me an email and we can adjust them. Any additions from this point, I will make sure to send as redline versions to everyone as well so that it's clear what is being changed as of this point moving forward. Okay? So only 50 minutes late. Other discussion?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first is about the chief student athlete.
Yes. Who's watching? Hi, babe.
Which is in the bylaw.
Yes.
I don't know anything.
That's a good question. So there's 3 offices of the state board. There's the office of the state board, the office of the ombudsman for public education, and the office of the student advocate.
Okay, I know. Then I do.
Yes. So the head of the office of student advocate is Faith Gibson Hubbard, the chief.
Right.
Yep.
I was looking at that as a student.
Gotcha.
The other question is the student advisory committee.
Yes.
When we met the last time, I volunteered to go to the schools, but I still don't know the schools that don't have.
I will look at that. I apologize. That's my fault. So we had talked about, and to make sure everyone's up to speed, we had talked about increasing the numbers of student high schools represented in the student advisory committee. And so I will get a list of the schools that are not represented and send it to everyone so that Fraser can take the lead in working with everyone to reach out to them specifically. In the coming months, we are going to start doing the application process for next year's student representatives. It'll probably start sometime. We'll try to get you an application to look at by February so that we can start it in March and have someone identified in May that they can start in September. Because it takes us some time to get through all the process, and we don't want to do it at a time where people are busy with other things in their juniors and senior years or sophomore and junior years. Or summer break, yeah.
Just a quick question, and I don't want to complicate the situation by having to move and close, but is there an update you can give us at a later point about the ombudsman appointment for next week?
It is going to be my executive director's report.
Oh.
Yes. Any other discussion? I do want to note for members as well that there is as usual, the last sheet probably in your folder is the upcoming events. There are a number that came in actually today and the day before. So I just want to make sure that you see those in case you want to attend those events that are coming up. So I have a couple items on the executive director's report The first is that for the majority of board members, the morning of January 24th worked best for the next strategic planning session. Please put this into your calendars. I will send you an update. It will be in this building in room 726 North. Again, I will send you all that information, but please be prepared to start at 9 in the morning and go till at least noon.
What day?
January 24th. That is the only day that 8 out of the 9 members can make. And I'm twisting Ashley's arm slightly.
The ninth member has.
The
yes,
ninth member to get there.
has made a concession.
Hopefully, yes.
Oh,
The,
that's right.
I have class.
okay, we'll do as much as we can from that, and then we'll you can go
So
whatever
it's
you.
9 to when?
9 to noon. 726 North. It's directly outside the student advocate and ombudsman's office. But I'll send you all the information in a Outlook invite. In addition to that, because we have new members and we have a new board, we do need to take new official photos. And so we will have, there's 2 options for potential dates to do those photos, either that morning of January 24th or to do them at the February working session. Is there a preference from board members? These are individual and then one group photo.
Should I say what was the second choice?
Before or during the February working session.
John Paul, I have a question.
Yes.
Why, everyone's nice and dressed up for the public meetings and very undressed up for the retreats and not even for the working meetings, so might it make sense to do it for public?
Well, generally, the photographers charge more.
That's
I can check with them.
No, that's fine. I'm just. That's it from here.
So does
Yeah,
anyone have a,
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, for waste stuff is okay.
does anyone have a preference on the day? Okay, I will do what I can to get the photographer. And
It's not a big deal, I just thought.
Right.
On the 24th.
Either I'll let you know by the end of tomorrow which day it will be, so that you can prepare your outfits ahead of time.
Get a haircut.
Get a haircut. Okay. So I do want to also follow up on one of the emails that I sent earlier this week, introducing our new staff member and fellows. Lanita Logan has joined us as staff assistant. This is her second day on the job. And then we also have 2 fellows who have joined us, Caitlin Payne, who's here, and Sarah Gopal, who had to step out earlier, but they are, we sent you their resumes and some bio information about them. We're really excited that both of them, that all 3 of them have joined us and broadened out our team. Yes.
Does everybody on the board know these people?
You will.
Anybody has not been introduced to anybody else? Everybody's been.
Great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Good on me for introducing people. So the last thing, and thank you, Marcus, for bringing this up earlier. I did want to update the board on the hiring of the. No, because I'm not going to talk about specifics. On the hiring of the ombudsman, we do have a candidate selected. The offer has been made and verbally accepted, and it is hoped that that candidate will start on January 22nd. If I get all the paperwork finished by Friday, I'm hopeful to have that resolution on the January agenda. So we should have all things, please cross all things. And I know Faith at Home is crossing all things, that we have the appointment resolution on the agenda for January 16th, so that the candidate can start on January 22nd, which is really exciting.
Can we also ask for just a brief update or report from our acting ombudsman?
I am so glad you asked that question. Yes, I've already scheduled it for the February working session to give a chance for the new ombudsman and Faith to work together for a couple weeks, and then come back in and report back on everything that Faith was able to accomplish as interim, and then give a couple weeks of the new ombudsman. See, more like this. Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. I have nothing further, Madam President.
All right.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
The meeting is adjourned at 7:12.
Board members, please.